Today's session is the latest in a series of events that have been designed to help us better understand the role of mining and minerals within a circular economy. We started last fall with a Mining for Circularity session that was part of the World Circular Economy Forum online. And that was followed by another event in March, which looked into strategic priorities from a policy and market perspective. In June, we held a session that focused on strategic role of data in achieving circular metals economy for the auto sector. And in October this year, we'll be hosting a couple of sessions, one on the circular economy circular metals economy for EV batteries in North America, as well as one on the recovery of critical minerals from end-of-life electronics. We'll post links to that at the end here, so we hope you can join us in that. All that's to say is that the current session is part of a larger and growing body of work that's attracting a wide range of partners. And we're hoping you'll consider engaging with us as we take these ideas forward into actions that do actually accelerate the uptake of the circular economy ideas for the mining and mineral sector. This is partly sharing information, but it's partly a call to action and an exploration of the strategic priorities for moving forward. In that spirit, we've designed today's session to be interactive. So there'll be a range of opportunities for you all to provide input, from polling to whiteboards, as well as Isabel mentioned, questions that you can post for our panelists, and we will do our best to integrate within the time available. We'll explain more about these tools shortly, but in the meantime, let me briefly outline the agenda for today. We'll start with an overview of the key CE opportunities and challenges from the perspective of a major global mining company, an extractive company from Finland focused on battery chemicals market, and an automotive company that I think you'll all probably recognize, seeking to move forward to a more integrated CE model of design and manufacturing. Our second panel will zero in on ways in which collaboration and strategic coordination is happening throughout minerals supply chain to advance circular economies in Africa, Latin America, North America, and Europe. As we all know, these are integrated strategies that rely heavily on strategic partnerships. And so this question of collaboration and collective road mapping is a really vital one for moving things forward. And finally, understanding there's no one size fits all. There are unique challenges faced by different commodities in pursuit of these circular economy values in the minerals and mining sector. So we thought we'd hear from the steel sector, from copper, we'd hear about critical minerals, and then the World Bank has done some really interesting work on the regional implications of the transitions toward circular economy in the metals and mining. So that's what we're going to try to cover rather ambitiously in 3 hours today. We'll take it from there. Again, this is what we hope is more of a catalytic moment than an end point, and we're looking forward to working with you on the questions raised and the inspiration shared for this minute. But let's get started with a first poll, get you involved and help us get a bit of insight into where you are all at with respect to circular economy as it applies to the mineral sector. So I'm going to ask Isabel to explain the Slido process and introduce the first poll.
Yes, thank you very much. And hello again, everyone. Yes, we'll be launching our first poll of today's session. And to participate in the poll, please go to slido.com. You may grab your phone, which we don't typically encourage attendees to do in a session like this, but please grab your phone or use your browser and go to slido.com and use the event code hashtag. So there'll be a hashtag and just add CE metals, or please use the QR code that is shown on the screen here with your phone to take you directly to the poll. And I'll ask my colleague Marian to switch to the poll screen so we may see together what this looks like. Perfect. Thank you very much, Marian. So we have our first poll that is active right now, and we'll encourage you to enter your answers. And we see here that there's already 39 people who have participated. That's great. If you're having any issues at all, please let us know in the chat box, and we'll help you with any tech issues. We'll also encourage you to keep this screen or your phone up during the session, as we will be going back to Slido a few times for more polls. So we'll give it another 10 seconds or so as we see more results come in. Looking good, and we see that a lot of the attendees have a good understanding of circular economy.
Of course, I think the more we all learn about this stuff, the more we realize it's complex, and that generally it's the proverbial blind men in an elephant scenario where you've got one hand on a tail or a trunk, and this is what it looks like. Well, it turns out it's a lot bigger than that, and this is part of why we have to keep working together on these issues to understand the full potential.
We'll give it another 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And then if you'd like, Alan, we could move over to the second question of the first poll.
Yeah. So this is an interesting one, because as to that question on the blind men and the elephants, everybody's got a thing that draws them to, or which is particularly characteristic of the circular economy. So we're very, very curious to hear your thoughts on what a single word, and think poetry, don't think prose, could be. So I'm waiting for that one to come up. And that's probably, oh, there we go. Okay. Great. I love those word clouds. They're just very inspiring. It's interesting with the sustainability question and how that concept has evolved so extraordinarily. And we recently did a paper on mining and the mine site applications for CE, and looked at how the concept of sustainability has gone from harm reduction into increasingly complex integrated solutions, and means a very, very different thing now than it did before. And that trajectory in and of itself is quite fascinating and worthy of our attention. Okay, while we're waiting for that, I'm going to just do a little bit of last minute housekeeping. We've talked before, but just a reminder, Q&A for, if you want to lodge a question for panelists, do it in the Q&A button, which is in the far right at the bottom of the screen. If you want to chat, do it through the chat one, which is the second from the left, at least on my computer. I made a reference earlier to Miro or a whiteboard. When we come to the concluding remarks and sections, we're going to open up a whiteboard that will have a few categories where you can place your thoughts and give your guidance and your suggestions and your reflections. So that'll be a moment later in the session where we'll be able to collect a little bit more. So if you have resources you want to share, if you have particular burning ideas or examples of pilots or something like that that you think is most important, then that would be a good time to share. You can do that in the chat, but we'll also be able to register that in the Miro board. So we have a wonderful collection of ideas in and around the central themes of reuse, sustainability, zero waste, regeneration, and recycling. So lots of inspirations to work from, and hopefully this session will help us unpack some of those and what they mean for the minerals sector itself. So without further ado, I would like to introduce my co-hosts and collaborators here. First off is Ashley Morris. Ashley is a CEO and co-founder of Corio, which is a boutique circular economy consultancy that is proudly Australian, but working with companies all over the world. Corio is currently working across the mining and metals value chain with the Australian government, with BHP, with Rio Tinto, Fortescue Metals Group, and Anglo American. We're also joined by Jeff McCarney. Jeff is a professor of environment and development in the School of International Development and Global Studies at Ottawa U. He's an associate director of research for the Institute of Environment and senior director of research for the Smart Prosperity Institute at the University of Ottawa. Jeff's research expertise includes areas of environmental, natural resource, and development economics with a specific focus on a range of issues at the interface of climate, circular economy, and natural resource. So I'm going to now pass it over to Jeff to share some insights from the key research and from our previous Mining for Circularity events. Jeff?
Yeah, thank you, Alan. I appreciate that. And it's nice to see everybody here today from so many different places that are popping up in the chat. It's really exciting to broaden this discussion, engage with a wider range of perspectives. So for those of you who tuned into the natural resources sector game changer session yesterday, you would have heard me outline that relatively little attention has been paid to date to understanding what a global circular economy would mean for resource producing economies. This includes many of the countries represented here today on our panels, such as Canada, Australia, Finland, Chile, and also any of the more than 80 countries globally, which rely on resource extraction as an economic driver, and particularly recognizing that many of those countries are emerging or developing economies in the global south. This lack of attention can be seen if we look at prominent models or examples of the circular economy. Many of these focus on increasing the efficiency of resource use and production, manufacturing, and consumer product markets, with a focus on flowing materials through the economy multiple times, but often leaving primary resource extraction on the periphery of the model as a flow simply to be minimized. So at first blush, this can be concerning for a primary resource producing economy. And it's something the organizing partners of this session have been diving into to try to understand the broader risks and implications. We here at the Smart Prosperity Institute have also just released a report with support from the United Nations Environment Program and Natural Resources Canada, which outlines some of what we've been finding. And I think a link to this report is now being posted for you in the chat if you're interested to dive into it further. If it's not, it will be shortly. Broadly, what we've been finding is that the initial impression from standard circular economy models that leave resource extraction on the periphery can be misleading. While we absolutely want to drive improvements in resource efficiency as a fundamental part of the circular economy, there are a number of reports from prominent international organizations. This includes the OECD, the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, the World Economic Forum, and the World Bank, who's going to speak to us here today, in addition to others, that highlight that a circular economy transition is taking place against a backdrop of significant growth in material demand globally. You can get more detail on these various reports and the projections that they include in the report that's just been posted to the chat. Thank you, Marion or Isabel. But two key observations I wanted to highlight here. First is that projections of global population growth alongside growing numbers of middle-class consumers in emerging economies combine to project that we're going to require approximately double the primary resources by 2060 that we did today or recently in 2017. In addition, projections of the material requirements for a low carbon transition push these boundaries even further, with significant additional increases in demand for key metals and minerals over the coming 30 to 40 years. And I'm sure Danielle will probably speak to this a little bit later in our final session. Second, even aggressive assumptions concerning resource efficiency improvements and recycling rates cannot keep up with this forecasted growth in material demand. Even if we assume 100% recycling rates, several sources still find increasing demand for both primary and secondary materials over the coming 30 to 40 years, including most metals and minerals. The implication of all of this is that we need to extend our understanding and approach to circularity right across the entire value chain, moving from upstream resource extraction through to processing, manufacturing, and down to end users and consumer markets. Nothing should be left on the periphery. This requires increasing our focus to strategically consider which materials we are using, where they are located, and how they are produced, in addition to closing loops and reducing waste in downstream consumer product markets. So as Alan mentioned, building from these core insights, we've been working with stakeholders across the metals and minerals value chain over the past year to identify core priorities for advancing circularity. As a brief summary of what we've heard to date, priority areas for action include improving our understanding of how circular economy principles and practices relate to established sustainable mining discussions, as well as more operational considerations, including the specific challenges and opportunities that arise at different operational scales and across value chains. Second, we need to develop partnerships and collaborations for circular economy innovation by convening and studying examples of regional ecosystems and by enabling pre-competitive collaboration to accelerate innovation and de-risk circular economy investment in metals and minerals. And the third is the role of circular economy in advancing metals and minerals contributions to a low carbon energy transition needs to be prioritized. This includes focusing on the potential for circularity in specific critical low carbon metal and mineral value chains, and to help identify the kinds of commodities that end users and investors are more likely to support. Now, there's more of each of these in the report that's been posted to the chat. For today, though, our intention is to continue to build on these priorities by examining drivers of circularity at different points along the value chain and at different scales, by investigating opportunities for collaboration and examples of open innovation, and by diving deeper into specific metal and mineral value chains that are critical for a low carbon transition. So I'm looking forward to the discussion, and I'll pass it back over to Alan from here.
Great, thank you, Jeff. I say a lot of work going on, and one of our things that we've been thinking about more, and I know there's lots going on many institutions across many companies, is one of our key challenges is bringing those insights together and learning from each other in a platform where there's an efficient and strategic exchange of information and ideas. So we're looking forward to figuring out what that looks like specifically going forward. Without further ado, I'll head to our second poll. And this poll focuses on your opinions of sorry, I forgot to turn on my camera there. On your opinion on the value of circular economy strategies for the mining and mineral sector. So Isabel, can you send us to that? Thank you.
Super, thanks, Alan. And again, for everyone joining us, that just joined us since the last poll, to participate in the poll, please join us at slido.com. The event code is CE Metals, and you may also use a QR code that is shown on the screen to access the poll. And we see already results coming in, so that's great. And a reminder to also just keep your page open to the Slido, since we'll be coming back to it again over the session. So we see we have 43 responses, and they're still coming through.
Right. And one of the things that Jeff has sort of alluded to there is that what we all know and probably recognize is that the durability of the metals and minerals as physical properties certainly create an incredible and exemplary material within closed loops, within circular economies. And so the challenge is really how to optimize what is a great gift, unlike certain other commodities which have limited and diminishing resources over time. We've got a lot to work with in the mineral sector here. The question is, how do we really optimize the potential around that? And that, to me, is what puts it very clearly into a very high from my experience and from what my aspirations are. Okay, this is good. Of course, we're going to summarize all these polls as part of our final report, and so we'll give it another few seconds, and then we can move on to the second question, I believe. And this one, do we really have to choose just one?
For this one, Alan, that might be the case. So we'll have to ask folks to prioritize in this one. But if you think otherwise, also we could encourage everyone to put comments in the chat box if you think that it's more than one.
Sure. Okay, that's great. All right. I think one of the main things for me personally is the fact that it delivers, it's one of the unique approaches that has the potential to deliver effectively on all three. And that's why my word for the word cloud was transformative. Okay, interesting. All right. let's give it another few seconds and then let's get on with the next round. And just one moment. There we go. So I am going to turn it over to Ashley, who will be leading us through this first panel. Ashley?
Hi, everyone. It's nice to be with you, and good on you, Aussies, for getting up early. I've seen a few of you in the chat. So this session is a scene setter. We're going to hear a brief presentation from leaders at Rio Tinto, Ford, and Terra Fame on their work on the circular economy. At the end of their presentations, I'm going to ask our speakers 3 rapid-fire questions. What does the circular economy mean for their organization? What is their organization's primary driver to move toward the circular economy? And finally, what are the top 3 areas that they see for collaboration along that mining, metals, and mineral value chain? Now, at the end of this session, we then want to hear from you, our audience. This is extremely interactive. If you haven't already seen that we are looking at poll results, etc. So to kick us off, I want to invite Paramita Das, the General Manager for Global Marketing and Development at Rio Tinto, to share their work on the circular economy thus far.
Ashley, great to be here. And thanks to all of you for taking the time to discuss this very, very critical topic today. I also want to thank Marion. Marion is helping me with the slides, so thanks to Marion for that. Allow me to say, I hope you, your professional and personal families are all safe and healthy. It has been a challenging time for all of us. We're covering a number of fascinating topics here today, but for Rio Tinto, we are constantly pushing ourselves to learn more. Learn from our customers, our partners, our consumers, and hopefully enabling human progress. And that means responsibly produced products that form a part of this future. Products that start with the right initiation, responsibly processed through the supply chain, and responsibly collected back from consumers for recycling. Marion, if you don't mind going to the next slide for me, please. Thank you. So let's start with the facts, and really briefly from our side. Demand for all our products is increasing. Customers want products that are sustainably sourced, and companies want products that help them meet their emission goals and achieve green certifications. The appetite for low carbon sustainable materials like aluminium, like copper, is here. But how do we avoid fragmentation and slow innovation cycles to avoid high carbon materials like plastics becoming the default product of choice? Marion, the next one, please. Thank you. What we do know is governments are ramping up mandatory requirements, and incentives for ESG credentials are only increasing. The European Parliament has backed a carbon border adjustment mechanism, CBAM. In the US, we already know the LEED certification led by the US Green Building Council. Sustainability reporting is now mandatory for large companies in many countries. Sustainable investing that incorporates ESG criteria is gaining traction amongst individual investors and asset managers, while ESG funds captured approximately $51 billion of new net money from investors in 2020, more than double of that 2019 efforts. Businesses committed to ESG and sustainability goals will certainly benefit from this new paradigm, and the metal and mining sector definitely has a role to play. Please allow me to share how we are approaching climate change. A short video from our side. Marion, I'll leave it to you now. you can see, human progress is essential to Rio Tinto, and Rio has made its own commitments. Net zero carbon by 2050, with interim targets set for 2030, and $1 billion set aside for 5 years to accelerate our progress. We at Rio Tinto fundamentally believe that a circular economy is here to stay and is our future. Minerals have a big role to play, and that has to be end to end. Allow me to use an example of aluminium to showcase what we're talking about. As you saw, 100% of our operations in Canada is renewable energy powered. So starting right, and then looking at the process. A clear example of this is that we had our first zero carbon aluminium produced through ELYSIS technology that came into being in 2019. We sold that metal to Apple, who then used it for their first MacBook Pro for its ESG credentials, of course. So innovation has a big role to play in the circular economy future. But it's not just innovation for us, but it's also for our customers. We've launched a new family of unique aluminum alloys that allows die casters to increase use of recycled content in the production of car parts. And then we are working on recycling. In 2020, we announced 2 projects on recycling. We are working with and evaluating solar, wind, and other cutting-edge technology to help us decarbonize our own operations. And we are taking it to our customers, many of them whom you're going to hear from today. Marianne, the next slide, please. Thank you. Rio Tinto is continuing to research limiting waste. So it's not just about producing it, but also how do we limit waste from mines all the way to the product during the process by using every mineral ore we dig from the ground and utilizing byproducts from metal processing operations. Again, a few examples that I can give is our partnership with Lafarge Canada. We have produced a new cement product called Alextra. Alextra basically uses the pot lining byproduct from our smelting operations, and that has been treated to make it safe. Today, all pot lining waste from our Quebec-based aluminium operations is treated to make it safe, and around 80% of that is recycled into a new product. Another example from US, where I am today speaking to you from, at our Kennecott, Utah operations, the copper operations, we're extracting tellurium from our copper refining process as a byproduct. Tellurium is a rare earth material and is used for the solar panels that will be a part of that future, the green future that we are envisioning. And lastly, again from Canada, we are using our titanium oxide production and one of the waste management processes to extract scandium, another rare earth, which we are then combining with aluminium, making a product or an alloy called aluminium scandium, which we are now taking into the aerospace industry. The first product is going out to make satellites. So we don't only need circular products or responsibly produced products here, but we're also taking it to space. We're continuing to access and assess opportunities to make our operations more sustainable. The next slide, please. But a question as the slides transition, but a question that I wanted to ask all of you is, but where are we today? Are we moving fast enough? And allow me to take automotive sector as an example. Automakers are playing their part in efforts to reduce global emissions. In fact, their investments in innovation and R&D has been tremendous. But OEMs are adopting sustainability initiatives faster than their suppliers. In 3 out of 4 high priority areas, as you see on the slide, they are advancing much faster than suppliers, and especially in the 2 high priority areas of sustainable manufacturing and supporting and promoting a circular economy. Automotive is a major segment for all of us. We have to do our part too. Marianne, the next one, please. So it's great to leave this problem, but then how do we solve for it? And Rio's approach is we need to be a part of the solution. I've mentioned partnerships are key to addressing ESG impacts, and partnering effectively and collaboratively will assist with this solution. So partnership is a very key cornerstone for us. I've already mentioned ELYSIS, but what needs to be mentioned is ELYSIS is our partnership with Alcoa, the government of Quebec, Canada, and with Apple. Last year, we partnered with Anheuser-Busch InBev, and you saw a result of this partnership in what we call the first low-carbon can for Michelob Ultra, launched earlier this year in the US. And this year, Rio Tinto and Schneider Electric signed a memorandum of understanding, MOU, to bring a circular economic platform for our customers like Apple, like Schneider, and like the automotive sector. Sustainability is a team sport, and partnerships are going to be key going forward. I saw that word also in that word cloud. But today's world is about trust but verify. And COVID has acutely made us aware of the power of digital. Data mining and digital solutions help us stay on track with traceability and tracking of scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions, for instance. I'll plagiarize a statement that Jeff used. I think he said, nothing should be left on the periphery. And he's absolutely spot on. Nothing should be left in the periphery. And digital helps us address that, to bring traceability, to show the world the full circular ecosystem. Sam, the next slide, please, if you don't mind. I just want to show what we are doing about not keeping anything in the periphery. So earlier this year, we launched a product called START. START stands for Sustainability, Traceability, Assurance from Rio Tinto on a blockchain technology. It is our work to bring radical transparency to our supply chain efforts around ESG products. So we have to do our part as individuals, but we also have to show the world what we are doing and how we are doing it, such that nothing is left in the periphery. The next slide, please. Now, START, we're very proud of this product, and we loosely call it the nutrition label of our products. START is designed to help customers, consumers, and end users make their decisions on material choice based on ESG credentials and provenance. Where are the materials coming from? START will help customers meet the demand from consumers for transparency. With the information provided by products like START, customers can measure, track the carbon footprint they have generated throughout their supply chain all the way to the end products. We hope it helps customers with their decision process of material selections. START has received an overwhelming response since its launch in February. Over 100 customers have signed up, and more inquiries are coming through as we speak. The high level of interest further corroborates that the future of circular economy is a team sport. We need like-minded partners to come and work together. We are excited to be on this journey with our customers and partners, and together we can create a more empowered, circular, and sustainable future. Thank you, everybody. And with that, I'll leave you with a short video and hand back to Ashley. Thanks, Miriam.
Today, we expect to know more about the products we buy, where they're from, key ingredients, and responsible production practices. Information about the products we buy empowers us to make informed choices. START Responsible Aluminium will bring together next-generation blockchain technology and Rio Tinto's commitment to responsible aluminium production to provide us with information about the aluminium in the products we purchase every day. With just one click of a QR code, START will reveal where the aluminium was made, its carbon footprint, and the environmental and social standards across production, from raw materials to final product. START provides the information we need to play a part in a sustainable future, whether it's our role in recycling, choosing products that use the lowest carbon aluminium, or spreading the word. START Responsible Aluminium. Our sustainable future starts here.
Thanks, Ashley. Back to you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Paramita. That was an exciting presentation, really touching on the need for innovation, partnerships, traceability and transparency, and the importance and imperative of the circular economy. So I appreciate all of those insights and I really enjoyed the videos as well. I'm now going to pass over to Jan Palasari, the Chief Commercial Officer at Terrafame. Jan's joining us from Finland. Jan, take us away.
Thank you, Ashley. Colleagues and guests, ladies and gentlemen, Jan Palasari was my name, and joining you from Finland at 2100 hours. I'd like to share the story of Terrafame and bring to your attention the tangible steps we are taking towards the circular economy. If I may have the next slide, this is how it looks at our homepage. So We are an integrated mining operation with the open pit mining using bacteria leaching for nickel and zinc bearing black schist ore. With this novel extraction method, we skip the energy typically used for grinding at the flotation processes at the mine site. Instead, what we see here in the aerial photo is the bioleaching heaps currently hosting 21 million tons of ore under leaching. Next slide, please. The way we describe our business is with the help of this cartoon. So we start with the open pit mining, we do the bioleaching, we get the metals from rock to pregnant leach solution and do the precipitation with the help of hydrogen sulfate, which is produced from the sulfur coming as a residue from the local oil refineries. Now, starting July this year, we are commissioning and ramping up the production at the battery chemicals plant, converting the entire mine output of 30,000 tons of nickel per annum to battery chemicals at one site. This guarantees us the full traceability for this supply chain. And we are, of course, very proud for the fact that we can today, with all the management systems and the quality system, invite our customers for single site audit for the entire value chain. On the next slide comes also the benefit of having the integrated production alongside with the bioleaching technology, through which we get from mined ore to battery chemicals on one side, saving the grinding energy and avoiding all high temperature processes in hydrometallurgical precipitation, followed by the pressure leaching to battery chemicals. Next slide. So as Terrafame, we are an integrated part of the battery supply chain, at least for the European theater. And we are very proud of 3 independent parties now recognizing us as the lowest carbon footprint producer for lithium-ion batteries on nickel. Having said that, we are not compensating this by wind power. We have not electrified our mine fleet yet. It's all in front of us. And jealous on the colleagues on the aluminium industry, I think the nickel industry needs also the incentives to share some of the benefit of the local carbon footprint, even with the upstream production. But we are committed as a philosophy to the highest standards and global compact initiatives from US. Next slide, please. So the step Terrafame is taking on the lithium-ion battery value chain is from shifting as being a raw material or intermediate producer to become a specialty chemicals company, providing the cathode active material production and precursor manufacturing, the nickel sulfate and cobalt sulfate on spec chemical products. With our processing, we've recognized 3 feeding points where circulated or recycled origin material could be brought back in case upstream refining would need to be implemented. Next slide, please. And I thought sharing on the next slide the overall understanding on the nickel market situation, how the nickel market should view the recycling space. Please take the next slide. As a nickel industry, it looks that in 2020s we will be facing a big challenge. We have the wealthy stainless steel industry growing on a constant rate, which basically brings half of the absolute nickel demand growth for the coming decade. But we have this new segment, which we believe will very much differ from the commodity industry being a nickel specialty chemicals industry for the lithium-ion batteries, demanding roughly same number of primary units for the coming decade. Next slide, please. And if just a short glimpse of Europe, already committed battery plant projects will require roughly 5 times Terrafame's output as a primary nickel input to their processing. The question locally remains how much of those units will be brought to Europe for refining and how much will be materials already refined in other parts of the world and coming as pole fabricates to the European theater. If I may have the next slide, please. Nevertheless, in the very DNA of this battery value chain is an understanding of the underlying requirement to be efficient in recycling. I refer to one OEM numbers that lithium-ion battery value chain can be extremely efficient already today, achieving over 92% of recovery rates from the old cells. But if looking the lithium-ion battery circularity from nickel perspective, we understand that units once mined and brought to stainless steel industry are not available as a secondary feed for the battery value chain. Our role as being a primary producer is to bring those primary units for the market, for the recycling purposes in the decades to come. Next slide, please. And I would like to finish my thoughts just mentioning that nickel, especially nickel, is an exceptional metal providing sustainability in all of its main uses, either in stainless steel or enhancing the electromobility. Thanks to the underlying low carbon footprint bioleaching process, we have chosen to be the base load for the electromobility for the lithium-ion battery industry. Recycling, we believe, will be an essential part of all operations throughout the value chain, including our bacteria leaching base, including opportunities we would have on the metal extraction, or later on using autoclaves to insert it back to the nickel and cobalt sulfate crystallizing. With this, I would thank you for the opportunity to share the outlook on the nickel market and share you the story of Terrafame being, to my understanding, the only nickel miner today using bacteria-based leaching as an extraction method. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Janne. That was insightful. I absolutely love the site overview and layout, the transparency of you being able to share that people can come to the site and have a look at it for their audit purposes, but also some of the challenges facing the nickel market. I think it's a testament for Terrafame to be able to produce it through bacteria or bioleaching processes and achieve that very low carbon footprint. This is the innovation we need in that full end-to-end thinking along the value chain. So thank you for those insights and that really informative presentation. Now I want to move through to hearing from Alessandra Carrion, the Responsible Sourcing Manager at the Ford Motor Company. Alessandra, I'll pass over to you.
Great. Thank you, Ashley. It's wonderful to be with you all here today. I really appreciate the invitation to speak to you all and provide the perspective from Ford's point of view in the value chain on circularity with the focus on mining and metals. So through my particular role at Ford in responsible material sourcing within purchasing, I'm tasked with ensuring that Ford reflects our corporate sustainability strategy and requirements across our supply base, thereby reaching mining companies and metal processors. So I'd like to begin by grounding you all in Ford's sustainability aspirations and the drivers behind our supply chain sustainability commitment that moves us towards the circular economy. Next slide, thank you. Ford Motor Company has a proud history of environmental and human rights leadership. That same history informs our purpose today, which is to help build a better world where every person is free to move and pursue their dreams. Over 20 years ago, we published the auto industry's first sustainability report, demonstrating our commitment to environmental progress. We adopted the industry's first Code of Human Rights and Basic Working Conditions in 2003. We've reduced our global water use by 75% since 2000. And then relevant here, we've shifted our best-selling F-150 truck to all aluminum construction in 2015, and also conducted 2 formal United Nations human rights saliency assessments since 2018. And then in 2019, Ford reset the bar by committing to the 10 sustainability aspirations you see on this slide to help build a better world. And there are 3 key aspirations that come into play for our circular economy strategy. Those are to utilize only recycled or renewable content in vehicle plastics, to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050, and to source only raw materials that are responsibly produced. In particular, around circular economy, our goals are to use sustainable materials in our vehicle design, responsibly source materials with our suppliers, close the loop in recycling in our plants and processes, and reduce our end-of-life impacts. So over 85% of vehicle parts and materials are recycled and reused at their end of life today, but the remaining 15% really represents an opportunity we can and we must address. So one action we have taken is to establish an interim target of 20% renewable and recycled. And then since 2000, we've to date used 12 industry first and world first plant-based materials in our production vehicles, and are researching possible use of other materials like tomato skin, bamboo, agave fiber, dandelion root, algae, and a number of other materials for our vehicles. In terms of our use of metals in manufacturing, one of our successes to date to avoid downcycling has been in the expansion of our closed loop aluminum recycling system. It recovers aluminum scrap during part stamping, but it keeps the various aluminum alloys separated so they can be recycled back into fresh alloy for new vehicles, saving time and energy. So our closed loop recycling system is in use at factories like the Dearborn stamping plant, where it recovers all the scrap that doesn't make it into our body panels, such as hoods, fenders, and doors. And recycling this material has saved 95% of the energy that would otherwise be required to obtain the primary material. So it's the equivalent of recovering about 30,000 F-Series bodies each month for F-150 to F-550. And we use the same approach in our other products, F-250, 350, Expedition, Navigator, and Bronco too. So as I represent our supply chain sustainability perspective, I want to focus on 2 of the foundational aspirations that drive our work in circular economy for metals, and that also establish our purchasing criteria for supplier ESG performance. Next slide, please. So as the slide is coming up on my screen, I'll say our first key aspiration is to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050. So climate change, we all know this, I've already heard this to date, but climate change is indeed a global challenge that affects us all, affects all tiers of our value chain, absolutely. We are actively monitoring reports like the 6th assessment report that came from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or IPCC, this summer, anticipating global warming to hit the 1.5 degree Celsius rise by early 2030s. And so when we consider the implications of climate change and how profound they are, we really not only are motivated by it, but understand that we have a responsibility to set ambitions that help us achieve carbon neutrality as quickly as possible. And so our aspiration here is to obtain carbon neutrality for vehicles, facilities, and suppliers by 2050 that are aligned with approved science-based targets, including interim targets that address the urgency of climate change as well as any regional differences. So we recognize that in tackling carbon neutrality, this also necessarily encompasses progress towards circularity. And we've started our journey first by carefully analyzing emissions data from all sources, including scopes 1, 2, and 3. And so as you can see here, we've determined that the largest source of our GHG emissions occurs during the use phase of our products when our customers drive our Ford vehicles. So we've aligned our vehicle development plans with metrics for reducing GHG emissions, and the plans cover tactics from improving in the interim our conventional and hybrid product efficiency, and then of course electrifying our iconic nameplates, and then prioritizing a carbon neutral portfolio. As far as our product development plans go too, we are increasing production of electrified vehicles significantly over the next decade, as well as working with other OEMs and utilities to partner in the development of charging infrastructure in our key markets first. And so the second largest source of our GHG emissions, and where my team in supply chain sustainability comes in, is of course within our supply chain. And Ford is working on several initiatives to reduce this impact. So first, we've created the PACE program, or Partnership for a Cleaner Environment, that launched in 2014. And for this program, we share leading practices with 50 of our key tier 1 suppliers based on our experience with our own global factories. So this information sharing supports suppliers to reduce energy and water use, their greenhouse gas and air emissions, as well as waste generation. And then second, for more than a decade, we've requested annually that our largest production and indirect suppliers report their GHG emissions voluntarily through CDP. And this is a reporting tool, if you're not familiar, that allows companies to disclose their emissions data and share the data with their customers, including Ford. So participation in CDP has increased each year at Ford since we began requesting the data. Last year, 92% of our supply base responded voluntarily to the questionnaire, and 85% have already indicated that they're integrating climate issues into their business objectives, and 72% have set an emissions reduction target. So what this tells us is that our largest suppliers are embedding GHG reductions into their business plans, which is critical in order for us to meet our own goals. And then third, and finally here, we address supply chain emissions to the point of origin of our raw materials, of course, if we're talking about our full supply chain. And we do this by building carbon neutrality requirements into our supplier global terms and conditions. So this is necessary for carbon neutrality and to support a truly circular economy. And so suppliers are required to cascade these same requirements upstream. And this is ultimately how we reach mining companies and metal processors within our supply chain to require carbon neutrality. Next, I'll go into the second key aspiration for supply chain sustainability, and that is to source only raw materials that are responsibly produced. So next slide, please. This year, Ford has launched our Supplier Code of Conduct. This is a very important document that summarizes our supplier expectations and requirements. The Supplier Code went into effect as part of Ford's updated global terms and conditions starting July 1st of this year. And one of the key components of the code is that we monitor and set expectations for our supply chain, again, all the way to the raw material point of origin. And electrification is definitely a driver here for us to achieve transparency faster for environmental and social benefits for communities around the world where we operate. So under our Supplier Code of Conduct, and also according to our responsible material sourcing policy, what Ford requires of our suppliers is raw material due diligence and increased transparency. We require information provided upon request to verify responsible sourcing, and we require participation in specific initiatives to support responsible sourcing. Some of these requirements include using only smelters and refiners conformant to an independent third-party responsible mineral sourcing validation program. And we also expect that parts supplied to Ford contain raw materials from sources that have been audited against an independent third-party standard, such as the Initiative for Responsible Mining Assurance, or IRMA. We also expect suppliers extend that responsible sourcing due diligence requirement to conflict-affected and high-risk areas, or CARAs, and cascade this due diligence requirement to their sub-tiers. So one of the key enablers here is that Ford works across industries to support standardization of tools, processes, and requirements for responsible raw material sourcing. Since we don't source exclusively from auto industry suppliers, we're working across sectors and technologies. So standardization importantly builds trust with our suppliers, our customers, and other stakeholders. We use standardized frameworks like the OECD guidance for responsible mineral supply chains, and we use standardized tools like the Responsible Minerals Initiative or RMI reporting templates to conduct our due diligence. We rely on these cross-industry associations like RMI and IRMA to convene companies to develop these points of view and take action to address questions on responsible sourcing. And so we encourage our suppliers to engage in multi-stakeholder initiatives as well, including on topics like circularity. So a couple of concluding comments I will make on responsible sourcing here are, first, that we absolutely emphasize the importance of these assurance processes and the scale at which we expect to see these applied in the near term to meet growing expectations for transparency and effective risk prevention, identification, and mitigation. Again, including setting roadmaps for circularity. This is how we obtain the assurance we need that our products or parts are responsibly sourced. And then second, we know that different assurance processes are relevant at different tiers of the supply chain. So we rely on these assurance programs to prescribe the necessary steps that companies must take to complete audits and ensure we have full coverage of responsible sourcing practices, especially at tiers that are farther away from Ford's direct influence. So sub-tiers, well past our tiers 1 and 2. So I've heard the theme and the messaging loud and clear already today, and that's that we can't do this alone. Standardization, especially and cross-industry collaboration, are necessary to drive the transparency and responsiveness that we look for as end users, so that we're all capable of delivering the results we seek for circular economy and carbon neutrality. And with that, thank you all.
Thank you so much. I think the key insights you shared overall, but then just what you summarized, Alessandra, really speaks to the mechanisms, the platforms, the collaborations and partnerships that can facilitate systemic change, end-to-end change across the value chain. I found the statistic I think you shared was more than 90% of your suppliers now are reporting, in the CPD, their emissions intensity and overall GHG emissions, which gives you those insights as well. I think that's really impressive, and there's a trusted space to do that, and I think that's so important to make this transition meaningful and honest and accountable. So thank you for that. Now, I want to invite all of our 3 speakers back because I want to go through 3 rapid fire questions with you. And then actually there's been some fantastic questions in the Q&A, and I see there's been some responses from our speakers as well. But I've picked out one of those questions and I'll also ask that one. But our first rapid fire question, I want to start again with Paramita, then Jan, and then Alessandra. If we could go one question at a time. The challenge here is to be succinct. It is more of rapid fire, and just really getting your personal take in response to these questions. So first up, Paramita, what does the circular economy mean for your organization?
So you did say succinct, so I'll make it very, very short. Actually, circular economy is the future. So what we say, impeccable ESG credentials, is at the heart of our strategy that's driving our thought process. And everything that we're doing in the future has that ESG and circularity lens, just to ensure that we are doing right by all our stakeholders or everybody who we touch upon. So with that, I'll hand over to Jan.
Thank you. Funny enough, being a primary nickel producer, our sourcing organization is following the utilization rate of the local oil industry, just to keep track on the sulfur residues, being one of the most difficult disposable items from a refining industry. Apart from that, in the DNA of the lithium-ion battery value chain, you have this inbuilt recycling need. That's the very fundament of the electromobility. So we cannot overlook that.
Thank you. Now, Alessandra.
Yeah, circular economy at Ford means that we have the capability not only of mitigating our ESG risks, but that ultimately we're actually adding value through our products when we account for the materials from extraction to end of life. If we can ensure their reuse and remanufacturing, provide new life to the same materials outside of their original use in the vehicles, I think we've gotten closer to our goal of achieving circularity.
Thank you. Let's jump into the second question. We'll go in the same order. So Paramita, what is the primary driver for your organization to accelerate toward the circular economy?
Again, keeping it very short, Ashley, we can probably use each of these questions for the rest of the conference, right? It's the right thing to do, for our customers, our shareholders, the communities that host us and allow us to operate in their land, on the land, our employees, and at the end of the day, consumers. We have at least a short survey of the employee or consumer base right here today, and I can tell you that all of us would like to stand with our hands on our heart and say, we've contributed to a better future for tomorrow. Back to Jan.
If I continue on the sulfur example, residue from the oil industry, we actually have a cost-efficient driver related to that. We take the sulfur in molten form, saving the energy to reheat or melt any sulfur. So we have a cost efficiency point of view there, and I think I'll leave it with that.
Thank you. Alessandra.
Yeah, our driver for circular economy is our sustainability aspirations, and then our desire to achieve transparency and then foster trust with our customers and our supply base.
Nice. Final question from me, and then I'll throw it to the one from our audience member. The top 3 areas for collaboration.
I'm assuming you want to go with me first again, right?
Yes,
I wish it was reversed for once, but let's try it. Look, first and foremost, Scope 3. Scope 3 is the biggest challenge that we have for our future, because my Scope 3 could be somebody else's 1 and 2, and their Scope 3 could be mine. So Scope 3 is number 1. Innovation and technical partnerships is absolutely the next one. And the third one is transparency, as Alessandra mentioned, because it's the trust and verify world that we're getting into. We really can't just say, trust us. We have to show to the world with data and transparency, radical transparency. And that also requires asking the tough questions, not only of ourselves, but also our own supply chains.
Brilliant.
With that, back to you.
Thank you. Jan.
In my presentation, I tried to bring this industrial mindset and difficulty to scale up the production fast enough to provide the end user solutions which can rely on, for example, nickel-based chemistry. And what we found in this market space is still a very immature and lack of standardizations. I very much share the Paramita's view that we are talking in different terms, and we would definitely need a good guidance which systems are the ones for the future that everyone needs to implement.
Brilliant. And Alessandra, those top 3 areas for collaboration.
Yeah, variation on the themes here. So first is engaging in these standardization forums, so multi-stakeholder cross-industry organizations like IRMA or Maya mentioned. Second would be developing standards, especially around secondary materials and the recycled scrap standards. I think there's an opportunity there when it comes to these assurance processes, especially for companies that are so far from the source, like a Ford. And then third, once again, broken record, generating those innovative ideas for collaboration and partnership. That Ford has an open invitation, to companies that might want to help work on our circular economy roadmap with us. So I'll stress that again.
Brilliant, thank you. You survived the rapid fire. You all were very succinct and excellent responses. So we have a question from an audience member. I think Alex Mallet, you put this into the Q&A function. So in thinking about the efforts of companies towards making their processes more circular, what do you think is the most important in spurring this change? 1, commitment by the C-suite. 2, government policy. 3, responsible investors / ESG, or the public or societal demand. Paramita, we'll go with you again.
You missed the 4th option, Ashley. It's all of the above, right?
Oh, yes.
No, all of the. Look, I'll just say that in 2020, we re-examined our approach to UN Sustainable Development Goals, and we realized that we have to work with our purpose, but also with the governments and the targets that are set aside by all of the stakeholders that you mentioned. So we focused on 2, SDG 8 and SDG 12, but for a true circular economic future, I think all of the stakeholders that you mentioned have to play a role, and each have a role to play.
Yeah,
over to you.
Well, being a sole European player, I actually wrote the answer of being uneven jurisdictions. We may be ahead of the pack in many ways, but if it's not the scalable solution for the industry, we are just weighted average impact. We need to share the innovations and also align the jurisdictions globally.
Brilliant, thank you. And Alessandra, your perspective.
Yeah, it very much matches what Paramita shared already, which is all of these actors and stakeholders have a role to play. So I wouldn't choose one over another. They're all enablers. I will comment that there especially in responsible sourcing, there's a rise of regulations that we are preparing ourselves for and we can anticipate. So, that's probably along with investment where we see a lot of activity, but again, it's they're all important players.
Brilliant. Thank you all so much for your presentations. They were really thorough, they were comprehensive, and gave a lot of key insights to our audience members. Those rapid fire responses. And we do want to now correspond that and get insights from our audience, their take on some of this. So Al, I'm going to pass back to you and let's hear what our audience has to say as well. But thank you all so much, panelists.
Thank you all, and a special thanks for being slightly ahead of time and yet packing so much insight into that first panel. You set us off to a really good broad start. So now we want to go to you as participants and hear your thoughts about key drivers and areas where you feel collaboration is most needed to accelerate progress in the minerals sector. So we'll go ahead and activate the poll.
For anyone who may have joined us recently, if you'd like to participate in the poll, you may do so by going to slido.com and entering the event code CE Metals. You may also use the QR code shown on the screen here with your phone. And we're now at 3334 responses. So we see some contributions coming in. And of course, as always, if you're having any tech issues accessing the poll, please let us know in the chat box.
Interesting. Regulation is holding firm there, the role of governments and how that will play a role. Market demand and supply chain. Very good. And again, you can see where people are coming from in terms of the different roles that they play throughout supply chains in terms of what will drive them and what they're looking for others to drive. I think this goes back to that question. The diversity of responses here goes back to the answers we heard from the panel about that range of dynamics that will help feed and keep a balanced and pace of acceleration there. Okay, we can, looks like the responses are slowing down there. We've got over 50. Let's go to the second panel and see what we have to say, or the second question rather. Interesting. Innovation, of course, being the core value that drives all of these areas, which we're trying to redefine and re-coordinate. Perhaps I'll see if I can get Isabel or Marion to track down the report that we've done recently on strategic use of data in the auto sector for metals recovery. And that was a real insight for me in terms of working through supply chains to link consumers with producers and seeing how you keep the noise from developing in those supply chains and how you avoid broken links in those supply chains. But this is one of many aspects that we are going to have to collaborate on and provide transparency around. Good, we've got almost 60 here. And I think in the interest of time, although we are doing well for time, we're on cue, I am going to suggest that we move on to our second panel. And thanks everyone. I'm going to hand it over to Jeff now for the second session, which will focus on this question of strategies for collaboration and the use of roadmaps and other tools to coordinate progress on CE innovation for the minerals sector. Jeff? Are you on mute?
Yes, thank you, Alan. Sorry, I was just typing a quick note to share that report you mentioned. I think I put it to the hosts only, but if Isabel wants to pass on to everybody, that would be great. So I think that was a great ending to that session and really set up our next panel discussion well, where we want to focus on accelerating collaboration to drive innovation towards a circular economy in the metals and mining value chain. And those are key themes that came up, I thought, through the presentations we just saw, as well as in the responses from the audience, particularly focused on the innovation aspect at the end. So in this session, we really want to zero in on ways in which collaboration and strategic coordination can or is happening throughout mineral supply chains, and specifically taking a lens from experts in 4 different regions: Africa, Latin America, North America, and Europe. So a core message that we've heard from previous engagement with mining sector stakeholders and through this session already is that circular economy is an area where pre-competitive collaboration can between companies and more open forums of innovation and data sharing can help improve perceptions of the sector. It's impacted social license to operate and help enable strategic partnerships to realize efficiencies along the value chain. So we're going to dive into more specific examples and drivers of collaboration with our panel here. Joining us, and I apologize in advance, I should have cleared pronunciations ahead of time, so please just correct me when I get it wrong, as I'm sure I will. First is Carl Wetherell, President and Chief Executive Officer of the Canada Mining and Innovation Council. We also have Hannah Torminen, Innovation Advisor with Nordic Innovation. Peter Ostojic, Chief Executive Officer of Neptuno Pumps, and also founder of the Center of Innovation and Circular Economy, which has been recognized as the first promoter of the circular economy in Latin America. And Steve Kisaki, Director and Global Head of Dalberg Implement, and lead author of a recent report by the African Circular Economy Alliance on increasing circularity in Africa's mining sector. And so Carl is in Canada, Hannah is in Finland, Petar, I believe, is joining us from Chile, and Steve is joining us from Tanzania. So welcome, panel. I'll come back to you all in a moment, but first I also want to highlight that in this session, we are also joined by one of Australia's leading graphic facilitation artists, Kat Leach of Catfish Creative. So Kat is going to help us with something new here by helping us bring this session to life, quite literally, by illustrating the session's dialogue live. I've never seen this done before. I'm really interested to see how it works. But as we move through the session, we'll refer back to Kat's illustration at key points and share a complete output at the end. You will also be able to see her illustration building through her shared screen on the side of the discussion. This illustration will then be made available as a key takeaway at the end of our meeting today and in the report that follows. Okay, I'm not sure, Isabel, if it was possible just to flip to Kat's initial illustration slide quickly so people can see that. There we go. Very nice. Okay, so like I said, that should be building on the side as we move along. But in the meantime, let's go back to our panel. I'd like to start by looking to interesting examples from each of your specific regional contexts to help illuminate how collaboration can accelerate circular innovation in mining and metals. So a question for each of you. Have you seen open collaboration happening in the metals and minerals value chain in your country or region? If so, please give one or two examples helping to illustrate why you think this collaboration is occurring, or if not, what do you believe the constraints are? Carl, perhaps we can start with you, and then we'll move to Hannah and Petter and Steve in turn. So Carl.
Awesome. Thank you, Jeff. And thanks for the invitation to come back here to this session today. I think it's very important to dive down into the next series on how and what is actually happening. So the question is, are we seeing open innovation and collaboration happening? The answer is yes, and we're actually seeing it globally. Although we're sitting in Canada, we are operating with partners in 8 different countries on open innovation collaborative projects. And I'll give you a couple of quick examples and why they're doing this. So one example is ICMM, for example. The International Council of Metals and Mining, they have their tailings aspiration goal #1, which is how do you engineer tailings out of the system? So in other words, instead of creating tailings, how do you basically eliminate it so we have no tailings to manage? And that started 3 years ago. It has the supply chain miners around the world collaborating together. And in basically a month and a half, there'll be presentations to the ICMM Council to fund the projects. So at one level, that's looking really promising. We're very excited to be involved in that. Another existing example, or really cool example, is on the crushing and grinding of ores in the mining industry. You know, it consumes about 6% of the world's electricity, yet it's about 6% efficient from an energy perspective. So about 5 years ago, we asked the question around the world saying, can you create a new technology to reduce that energy consumption by 50%? And what happened was within 5 years, we went from a question to a prototype operating in 5 years that's reducing the energy by 42%. Second prototype, we're expecting to be 72%. But the really important thing about this is that we have 33 people involved from 13 companies and 3 countries, all openly collaborating all across the supply chain to create this disruptive platform technology that hasn't been seen in decades, basically. And I'll give you one last really quick example. And this is related to electrification. Everybody knows about battery electric vehicles. They're becoming more important with the industry, but there are a lot of challenges with those in the sense that a lot of energy is wasted moving the batteries around because they're huge and they're custom designed and everything else. So there's a project underway right now that's actually taking, and there's a lot of other issues with that, taking an existing technology that is commercialized in Sweden for roadways, adopting it to underground mines to basically take these large-scale batteries, reduce them to off-the-shelf, and a lot of other benefits to the mining industry. That includes mining companies around the world. It includes technology companies in Australia and OEMs from around the world as well, all openly collaborating to do this co-development. And that's a key word here, is that co-development of new platform technologies. And the reason these organizations are collaborating is really simple. If you look at the mining industry, the mining companies, they all have the same problems. It's all related to energy, water, or environmental footprint, producing tailings, et cetera. How do you reduce that consumption of energy, consumption of water, reduce the environmental footprint? And on the supplier side, it's basically, you know, it's hard for suppliers typically to sell into the mining industry, especially new technology. By having that market pull, and you know exactly what you're trying to create, you get a more rapid production of new technology and deployment as well, versus trying to sell something. And I should state too that these examples, you know, our take on circularity at CMIC is not circularity per se, but rather how do we drive the industry, transform the industry to a zero waste industry? That's what we're about, which inherently is all about circularity. And I'll leave it at that. I think my 2 minutes are up. Thank you.
Thank you, Carl. I appreciate the really great start focusing on some really key examples in building in the idea of new platform technologies, which we discussed before, but I think is a key insight in thinking about how this sort of collaborative innovation process works and where it needs to focus. Hannah, we'll move over to you.
Good evening, good afternoon, and good morning. Very happy to be here with you today. I would like to take up also cross-industry circular innovation and matchmaking up, as circular value chain can often also resemble more a large ecosystem with tech enablers or remanufacturers or utilizers of side streams, for instance. Together with the Finnish Innovation Fund, Sitra, and Accenture, Nordic Innovation has been running circular business model workshops for 120 Nordic companies in industrial ecosystems, not specifically in metal and mineral value chains, but at a larger scale, and launched also step-by-step toolkit for manufacturing companies to go circular, called Nordic Circular Economy Playbook. Can of course also be used by companies all around the world. And we have experienced that companies often can share similar inefficiencies in their operations, in processes, in logistics, end of life of products, or can have also underutilized capacities. Therefore, taking various inefficiencies has been a concrete starting point and can enable also encompassing circularity as a full business strategy in all parts of the operations. And what we also have learned from the companies is that collaborating in an industrial ecosystem or being part of a larger network, for instance, a Nordic network, enables utilizing strengths, avoiding double work, or opens up completely new matches between industries. Together and only together, Nordic region is the 11th largest economy in the world. So this does matter. There are also fantastic cross-industry examples from national levels. For instance, a large-scale industrial symbiosis from Finnish Lapland, where new business models have been created around underutilized side streams, among others from mining, metal and forestry industries. Ambitious circularity level is nothing new to the Nordic companies. As such, it's also happening without enabling organizations like us. However, a priority in the region has been to accelerate and create further arenas for collaboration and provide companies the tools to go circular together with their partners. We have also launched a digital platform called Nordic Circular Arena for companies to work together and also accelerate the circular economy transition in the region. And next, specifically in the mineral ecosystem in the Nordics, increased traceability and recovery, among others, will be also in the focus of regional collaboration. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Hannah. Really interesting perspectives. Again, I think highlighting how particularly support for Nordic businesses and regional ecosystems can lead to cross-industry benefits, but also expand more globally as well. I think I heard you hinting to. Next, we'll go to Pedar for Latin American context.
Hey, how are you? Well, Latin America had a really special way to face the circular economy. I would say that the ecosystem here had the circular economy in our DNA. Sorry. So we always thought and lived through the circular economy through using our resources in a really efficient way. So what happened in the industry of the mining industry was that it started really bottom up. A lot of suppliers started to promote and develop circular economy business models because they were already doing that for 50 or 40 years. So it started to move the wheels here. And after that, the mining companies started to take this new business model and promote it even further. So what happened, I would say the first thing that they did was to sign the biggest contracts for renewable energy, which was a really great thing that happened in Chile. I don't know if you are aware of that, but Chile right now is the #1 generator and user of renewable energy in Latin America. So that really promoted what was going on here. And after that, all the governments started to take on the circular economy. So with the great success cases from the companies, then the huge mining companies that were also promoting the circular economy, what happened with our government is that they started promoting collaboration, and that was for me the last step that we needed. And for example, we have here in Chile Corfo, which is a kind of production minister that created the first circular economy center in Latin America with public and private sector. And it took together all the three of the top mining companies in Chile with universities, with suppliers, with a base investment of $25 million. And I think that would be a great example for the rest of Latin America to promote even further the circular economy in the mining industry. That's just one case from Chile. But then we have our neighbors in Peru, Bolivia, and Argentina, which have almost the same scenarios. And I think the experience that we will have from Chile will be great for these other countries. So I think we're on a great shape here in Latin America, and we are always looking forward for a South collaboration. And that's why I'm really happy about this panel, because we know that we can grab all the experiences from Latin America and have some cooperation with Africa and some other regions around the world.
Thank you, Peter. It's a really nice contrasting example of how you can have sort of drivers for collaboration from sort of top-up processes trying to drive regional ecosystems are emerging from the bottom up and really leading to government engagement towards the end of the process instead of at the beginning, and different models that can be followed. Steve, I'm interested to see what you have to share from your perspective as well in Tanzania.
Thanks, Geoff. And coming into this with a bit coming out of a study that we just conducted under the Africa Circular Economy Alliance that we're engaged with as Dalberg. And in that study, we actually focused on circularity opportunities in the mining sector. The study focused a bit more on the larger scale mining operations, but I'll talk about artisanal and small scale mining shortly. But there is a lot of collaboration opportunities that we saw, and from covered by a few as well in terms of the conversations we've just had. But the large scale mining sector definitely has a lot to teach, the continent in terms of what you're able to do. And we saw quite a lot from an energy perspective. I think Paramit also spoke about that in her presentation. There's lots of opportunities that we saw from a water perspective, and recycling and reuse of water, and making sure that there's more efficiency with that, and actually even bringing some of that water back into communities, and that can also be used. Rock and waste dumps, particularly non-acid forming rock that was actually being used for construction work and also supporting communities as well. But also lots of work that's currently going on within thinking about chemicals and circularity in terms of chemicals and chemical waste. But from a supply chain perspective, which is probably one example that I could also touch on, we did see quite a bit around tires. And from a mining perspective, our study revealed that in terms of the top 5 costs in a mining operation, one of them is actually tires. And a lot of companies are actually figuring out and working out ways where they can recycle and reuse the tires and all the products that can come from tires. And that's very, very positive in terms of how we saw it. But coming to the artisanal and small scale mining sector, now the large scale mining sector across the continent employs about 1 million people. The artisanal and small scale mining sector employs about 13 million people. So from an African continental perspective, definitely a space that we should be looking at and thinking about circularity in that space. We are seeing a lot of innovation coming in, particularly around reprocessing of tailings, and that's actually picking up. But equally, there's a lot that can be done from a tech perspective, and also thinking about a lot around responsible mining practices that can also be brought into the artisanal small-scale mining sector that ultimately help the sector to become more circular, transform it, and help that to actually create even more jobs, but even more dividend for countries. And some of the constraints that have been, as I say, around thinking around policies and the policy frameworks that can be built, but also the right engagement with that artisanal small-scale mining sector, which is quite transient. And a lot of work needs to be done in that perspective. And I think lots of learnings as well that you can bring into it.
Okay, thank you very much. I really appreciate that perspective you had. And we have to think not only about collaborations among like industries, but you have to think about how the large-scale mining sector can engage with the artisanal and small-scale mining sector and the challenges that might be involved in that, but the importance if we're going to keep circularity grounded in broader responsible mining discussions. So thank you. I believe we have a minute. Is there any quick follow-up anybody would want to add in quickly following that? Carl, your hand's up. if anybody else wants to add in, raise your hand, and then we can go on to our second question. Carl.
Yeah, just a couple of things. Just really great things that actually all three speakers had mentioned, and basically emphasize what Hannah and Peter had mentioned. Is basically it's not about starting from scratch. And I think Hannah, you started that, right? There's a lot that exists. Is by having another organization that connects and coordinates, you actually accelerate, and that's the term you had used before. And Peter, something you said that was really, really important is we've done a lot of this stuff in Chile. Why reinvent the wheel, right? Leverage what already exists. And what we see in the mining industry, we tend to be regionalized. Can we break down that regionalization, right? Because we tend to do our own thing versus collaborate. So we should be following up with each other. And Steve, I loved what you said about artisanal mining and bringing in technology. I was actually involved in a project helping artisanal miners by bringing in new technology to increase recovery and reduce tailings, right? By really simple, it doesn't take a lot. So I love that comment about our artisanal mining. There's a lot of connectedness here. It's great.
Thank you. Any other quick follow-ups? Hannah, your hand's up.
That's very good points, Carl. And also would also like to continue that also this arena is really important, but that we also get to be inspired by other countries and regions and also front-runner companies. So that's also a way to go forward. So thanks for all the organizers.
Thank you. Okay, unless there's anything else, Bernie, we get to one more question and then we can switch back to some audience questions. So if there's anything that's coming up for the audience too, I think Isabel mentioned, but please start thinking about what you might want to put in the Q&A and we'll come back around. But some really interesting insights and examples through that first round of questions. And what I'd like to do now is dive further into specific strategies, policies, or priorities that can help further advance open innovation in this space and the sort of initiatives that you've already framed. So again, for each of you, what would you identify as the most promising strategies to encourage more open innovation or collaboration on circular economy initiatives in your country or region? For example, have roadmaps been effectively deployed? And if so, can you give an example? If not, or not effectively, what other strategic approaches to encourage more open circular economy innovation would you identify? Perhaps we can go in reverse this time, starting with Steve, and then to Peter and Hannah, and ending with Carl.
All right, thanks, Jeff. And I really want to start with the perspective that the circular economy construct is still nascent across the continent. And it's something that it has existed, but we actually need to bring it to bear to really understand it a bit more. And actually appreciate that there's a lot of circularity already happening anyway, but that construct needs to actually be built. And from that perspective, there's a lot of work that we're doing in terms of engaging with countries to help them think through what countries are doing and also really bring that knowledge back to them and understand that some of the work that's actually being done does actually strongly stand within the circularity space. Now, from that perspective, we're doing quite a lot of work in terms of from the Africa Circular Economy Alliance in terms of engaging with countries to really look at policy frameworks, but also look at roadmaps. And that work is being done between ourselves, the Africa Development Bank, CITRA, and UNDP, with the intent where we can actually then start to work with countries to build those roadmaps. So some are there at varying levels, but actually just formalize them and build them up. But as we do that, there's an element around business incubation, and the ecosystem, again, across the continent is highly driven by SMEs. And how do we make sure that we think about SMEs and circularity potentials, but even as we think through that, and SMEs linking up, and we've heard about traceability and all, how do we make sure that our SMEs are getting supported through incubators, accelerators, and actually capturing all the right knowledge that they need, and being able to then work with the mining sector in the best way possible. And a lot of work that can be done from that perspective. And there's again, thinking about circularity and how we build that out from an SME perspective, particularly highly, highly important from our perspective. And then the other part of this is just building the knowledge, as I said before, and how to make sure that what is a nascent construct is actually built out further. And the AACEN is actually thinking about bring even more circular programs into universities. But again, I think universities are one place, but I spoke about business incubation. That's another space where we can actually build that knowledge a bit more. And that way we're seeing an opportunity where we can actually try to build this out a bit more and really think about this body of work and actually grow it a bit more. But even beyond that, I think, as Peter said, there's a lot of learning that we can bring into this, because there's a lot of, listening to all the speakers today, right from the first panel and this panel, I think thinking about the global north, there's a lot of work that's been done and a lot of learnings that can be brought back. The mining sector, particularly large scale mining sector, can actually help with bringing those back and actually sitting with them in rooms where they come in as trusted partners and having a seat at the table when you're developing policy programs and even roadmaps will be highly essential for the continent.
Thank you. Really interesting. I really like the way you highlighted that if you're thinking about roadmaps, we have to think about different actors at different operational scales within doing that and how they can help enable technology transfer across the different players and drive innovation in different ways. Peter, over to you next.
Thank you. Yeah, we are really fortunate in Chile to be in one of the first countries in Latin America to start developing the circular economy. And last year we had the first roadmap on circular economy for different industries. But again, the mining industry as the important industry that is for our country was one of the first to develop this, even 2 or 4 years before that. And so right now, not only we have this roadmap that was promoted for the government and different agencies, but we also are collaborating with the World Economic Forum with the Scale 360 initiative that is taking that, I think, one step forward, introducing industrial symbiosis between different industries. So right now, we are collaborating between the mining industry, forest industry, fishing, construction industries, and that's really an interesting way to move towards a circular economy. But I absolutely agree with Paramita from Rio Tinto that especially for the mining industry, I would say all the industries, in fact, scope 3 is the, I would say is the driver for that will help most industries to speed the transition up, because there is 50, 60, 70% of your carbon footprint. So what we've seen in, for example, in the mining industry, in the copper mining industry here, is that the importance of scope 3 is making these companies create the world's first circular economy contracts that, for example, we've seen. I would like to name Collahuasi, which is the second copper mine in the world, which is located in my region. They just showed 1 month ago the first circular economy contract for local suppliers. So that's a huge step that help us move towards the transition of a circular economy. And I would like to add that for Latin America, it's also really important to jump on the train of the fourth industrial revolution. We had a great deindustrialization process in the 80s. So right now, the circular economy is the ticket to reindustrialize in a 4.0 way our economies.
Thank you, Peter. Really interesting perspectives there as well. And Hannah, how about from your side? What are you seeing to help drive these sorts of initiatives?
Yes, the Nordic countries, Denmark, Iceland, Norway, Sweden, Finland, and the 3 autonomous regions, Greenland, Åland, and Faroe Islands, have joint roadmap for circular transition in the region. And it's collaboration driven through vision, the vision of the 5 prime ministers for the Nordics to become the most sustainable and integrated region in the world by 2030. And 2 of the 8 action areas for business collaboration on the road for realizing the vision are sustainable mineral and metal production, the resource question of resources that are needed for the technologies to ensure carbon neutrality and green transition, and then circular business models. And as these are societal system level changes, as also many of you pointed out in the first poll, I agree, and I think it has been important for the Nordics to have a well-defined and also measurable goals, as well as to have also the public sector as an enabler for innovation. But indeed, as an enabler and supporting, as then co-creation of the concrete actions needs to be together with the businesses who have then the power of taking the transition actually forward. And we see that circular collaboration has benefited of three issues. First, facilitation, both circular business model tools and these concrete platforms for companies and other stakeholders to meet, work together, and test, like those circular business model workshops, Nordic Circular Economy Playbook, or Nordic Circular Arena, which is, however, completely new. And then financing to share the risk with the companies so that they can then focus on piloting and testing. And then third, we also see more and more focus on data sharing, addressing both the opportunities and challenges for that, as many of the business models are digital in nature. Tomorrow will be the next meeting of the 5 Nordic ministers of trade and industry, and minerals and metals will be high on the meeting agenda. And all in all, this is a long-term investment, but we're starting to see some positive results on the road.
Thank you. Great. And Carl, I think last word on this one over to you.
Awesome. Thanks, Jeff. You know, I never have the last word here. So anyway, and again, just a bit of context. The way we've approached this is a little different. We didn't focus on circular economy. We focus on transforming the business of mining. The outcome of that are direct impacts on circular economy, decarbonization, ESG, everything else. And this is how we get the mining companies actually working, collaborating together. And a really important thing here is that innovation was the key word that came out of the last session, right? Innovation is about people. It has nothing to do, zero to do with technology. It's about people and getting people to work together. Or as I like to say, innovation happens at the speed of trust. And if you can't build that trust within a group of people, an ecosystem, people to collaborate, you're not going to have innovation, right? So it's about people. It's all about people. And we've spent a lot of time doing that. Now, what we've done is we've used the development of roadmaps addressing various aspects of the mining business, for example, underground mining, surface mining, processing, et cetera, as a method to get people together to talk and to build that trust. You go from the original, you're my competitor, to I had no idea, let's go have dinner and talk about collaborating. We've seen this happen within 24 hours. It's shocking to see this happen. It's really cool. But we get them together and we create that alignment across the supply chain amongst miners and amongst suppliers. Steve, you talked about SMEs, right? It's about suppliers. I think Peter and Hannah also mentioned that. It's not just the mining companies, but it's across the entire supply chain. But the critical thing that we're focused on are the complex business challenges at a higher level that are really risky, like the platform changes. How do you change underground mining from drill and blast to continuous so you actually eliminate tailings? It's a tough nut that no single company is going to attack. How do we get together to collaborate and solve that? But the important thing, probably more important than the actual roadmap, is a process used to get there, and that's the design process. We use ideation design processes to get there. Peter, you're nodding your head. You've done this before, probably, right? The design process, because what we do in that process is challenge the existing paradigms and get new design principles. So you actually go from that's impossible, it'll never happen, to let's start today. And the previous example I gave on processing, that's exactly what happened. Impossible, can't be done. Here's the roadmap. My God, we can do this. 5 years later, we actually have a new platform technology. So it can be done, but by challenging those design principles, we actually can turn things around really quickly. So a really simple example of that, a design principle right now in mining companies is how do we manage tailings at scale? Our approach to that and how we flip that is how do you engineer how you get to zero tailings, right? Or zero waste rock. We're increasing our energy consumption. How do you reduce it to net zero energy? Not net zero GHG, net zero energy. Flip the paradigm and challenge the paradigm. A really, really side reaction of this, because we all see this as what technology do we collaborate on? What problem do we solve? The more important side effect or artifact of this design process that we're seeing is who we collaborate with. And all the other speakers have talked about that. It's not just about a miner, it's about everybody. And what we're seeing through these design processes and creating roadmaps is people the participants are going, I had no idea you were so similar to us. this is amazing. Can we talk about collaborating? And a couple of really cool examples we have are, for example, oil and gas based precious metals all working on, for example, ore sorting. You wouldn't think they'd be connected, but once you get them in a room, it's like, my God, I had no idea it's the same. So it's about who, and again, leaning on the other speakers outside of the industry. Once you start putting them together, you see who else can we collaborate with: aerospace, automotive, et cetera. A key reason and what kind of like the aha moment we see during this process is a lot of the companies find that, oh, you're working on the same thing we are, you have the same problem we do, why don't we collaborate? That just, it's amazing how much that happens. You put a roadmap up and, oh, we're working on that, and so are you. How do we collaborate, right? We see this all the time. It's absolutely phenomenal. So the idea of the design process and the roadmaps on alignment across the industry, the pathway to get to the impossible is the way I like to put it, and also who do we actually collaborate with. And again, I want to lean on something Steve said, because it was really, really important about SMEs and financing, right? Because you have a lot of these cool ideas. Financing is really, really hard. So we're not tackling that directly, but to actually accelerate that, we work very closely with existing incubators, company creators, VCs, and institutional funders in Canada and elsewhere with that pull. When you have the market pull, then we talk to these people. It makes investment much, much faster and much easier. And I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you. You summarized up the arguments that everybody's made better than I could, it was fantastic to have a last speaker do. What I'd like to do is I'm going to come back to a question from the audience in a minute. If there's other questions, please put them in the Q&A. But from what I've seen so far, I'll give the panelists a heads up. We've heard some really good examples of what's happening, key drivers that are pushing collaborations ahead. A couple of the questions relate to barriers. So I'm going to come back to a question for you afterwards about what are the barriers to making this happen. But before we do, I've seen this illustration sort of filling in as we've been going. So why don't we flip over to that really quickly and just see if we can see what's coming together. And I think that's just been put up on our screen, and it's not big enough on my screen for me to read what it's saying. Oh, there we go. Great. So picking up on pathways, issues of trust, enabling of the design process, industry as an ecosystem, ensuring we have traceability, and working across countries with different actors, and highlighting that we're not starting from scratch. So a lot of the different themes that have come up in the discussion today are really showing up here, which is nice to see. And I'm sure a little bit further as we continue going through the last questions. So this is really great. Thank you, Kat. And I think it'd be a really nice takeaway from the session. Okay, so going back to the Q&As and maybe just one or two last questions before we'll wrap up and move to our last panel. A couple of folks have highlighted around barriers, and I think one is coming from Mining Watch, who are highlighting, a couple of questions, if I can paraphrase, highlighting global statistics of waste generation and material use, and asking how exactly we can move towards zero waste mining or metal value chain, either in Canada or globally. How does the math add up? And trying to understand how these propositions could work. So whether there's a barrier just in terms of the scale of the challenge that we're trying to address. At the same time, Tuli Potila has asked a similar question: is what are the biggest challenges of reducing primary use resources that companies in this industry struggle with? And perhaps, what are the biggest challenges to allowing the types of collaborative innovation processes that we've been highlighting? So if we could speak to those, maybe Isabel, you could flip me back so I could see the speakers here. There we go. And does anybody want to dive in first and try to tackle that? Carl, I see your hand up, and if others want to signal, I'll come to you next.
It's funny, I was just typing an answer to that first question, so I canceled on the way. It's a really good question, puts it into perspective. So a couple of pieces of that. Yes, it's a really, really hard thing to do. The whole idea of zero waste is aspirational, but we are making progress towards it. So it's not going to be easy, but we are actually getting there. We're actually seeing progress, which is really exciting, and it's actually accelerating. And the other part of the question was, giving all this volume of existing waste, and again, our perspective on this whole idea of zero waste, zero tailings, et cetera, is future. We're not looking at the past right now. We're trying to drive into the future. So explicitly, we being CMAC aren't specifically addressing the reprocessing and reduction of existing tailings. However, we are working with other groups that are doing that, as SMEs and other labs. So great question. Thank you.
Any other barriers or priorities that others would highlight we need to look at to move this ahead? So Peter, I saw your hand, and Steve, I'm not sure if I saw yours after that.
Yeah, in Latin America, we have, in fact, I talked about in the previous questions, we had a great process, I mean, a sad process of deindustrialization. So right now, when these huge industries are looking for solutions, it's really hard to find them because you don't have the infrastructure installed. So fortunately, we are living through the fourth industrial revolution, and the Moore's law, it's being applied, and it's much easier to create an industry 4.0 from out of scratch today than 20 years ago. It's much easier and much cheaper. I can say that being a supplier myself for the mining industry. But we need to accelerate the reindustrialization of our territories here. And the second thing is trust, because as you had decades of not being able to manufacture or remanufacture most of the huge equipment that we use in these different industries, you have a cultural thing going on that some industries don't trust the local suppliers and they trust overseas companies. So that's something that fortunately the circular economy has allowed to solve, because you see fast solutions from the suppliers to these industries.
Thank you, Peter. Really interesting. And I think highlight, that issue of trust has come up a few times. I think it speaks to another question that's just popped up about the relationship between circular economy and improving social license to operate as well. Steve, did I see your hand was up? Did you want to come in?
No, I didn't, but I'm happy to actually take the one on circular economy and improving social license.
Yes, please do.
To tackle that a bit. The way actually we say it, and I started touching on a few of this, and when I say SMEs, we tend to find that many mines are actually built in probably sometimes rather peri-urban or rural areas. And you will find a lot of, at least in our context, I mean, in the African context, a lot of issues that come from a social license to operate are actually coming out of the community very close to the mine. And when we're able to actually empower communities to actually participate in the mine circularity, and I spoke about SMEs, it's an opportunity to actually build onto local content that can actually then support the mining operations in terms of building the circularity. That can really help us secure even a stronger social license to operate. Now, granted, mines cannot do everything. And I think this is where Carl was also coming from with one of the points that I think he raised, which is there's a lot of work that mines should, large-scale mining companies should be doing. But there's a whole sense as well that they can't do everything. I mean, governments need to step up, donors need to step up, and everyone else. But for whatever they can control, I feel that the social license to operate can be secured, where we are allowing communities and citizens in countries to participate and interact and transact with mining companies, but not just by the conventional ways, but there's actually a lot of circularity opportunities that can be built back into the communities and supported through communities and really help them scale up from that perspective.
Thanks, Stephen. I think that link between circular economy and society and communities is a really important one. It's something we haven't seen addressed in a lot of research that we've reviewed either. It's an area that needs a lot more attention. Hannah, if there's anything you wanted to add?
I could just briefly add to what Steve was also discussing. And I think really here the key is also the facilitating also the arenas for dialogues and throughout the industries, but also the local communities, as Steve also was mentioning. So there we have also a lot of roles for external facilitators and organizations to play, and of course together with the companies. So can just echo that is a lot of focus in the Nordics as well.
Perfect, thank you. It's great. Carl, I see your hand up. Do you have comments in sort of 1 minute or less to wrap things up? And maybe Isabel, you can flip the illustration back up at the same time.
Really quickly, just to add on a couple of things. One is the idea of trust. Peter talked about trust a little bit, but there's also a trust with, for example, with large scale mining companies and startups. Startups are more agile. They tend to have solutions faster and can fit into large companies. but there's a bit of a reticence to do that, and large miners actually tend to look at OEMs. And the other piece too is this regionalization piece, right? There's a bit of trust issues there. We can do it better. We're located in the region. We know better. It'll happen. So getting this global collaboration gets a little harder because this, I would phrase it a bit of lack of trust between regions.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I think it's an interesting way to wrap up and you know, key barrier to overcome in terms of driving these sort of cross-regional collaborations as well. I'll leave the picture up here for a second. I think what we wanted to do was finalize here by going back to the audience with a couple of last polls before moving to our final session. And so Isabel or Marion, if you can get the last couple of polls to move to the audience here set to go, I'll leave it to you.
Great, thanks everyone. So we've got another poll going right now. And again, you can join us at slido.com with the event code CE Metals. And again, as always, you can use the QR code shown on the screen to participate. And if you have any issues, you can reach out to us in the chat box so we may be able to help. And we already are seeing some responses coming in. So that's great. Thank you so much for participating.
Okay, great and interesting. Seeing a lot of initial support. I think roadmaps are really important and necessary part of enabling the type of collaboration we've been talking about. Interesting to see.
Maybe we'll give it another 10 seconds or so.
Yeah. And then move on to the next one.
Perfect. If you haven't participated yet, there's still a few seconds to do so. Okay, so maybe we can go to the next poll. Thank you, Marion.
All right, so looking here, what do we believe is the primary barrier preventing greater collaboration or open innovation to move towards a circular economy? If you think that what we have up here doesn't capture your issue, you can click other and maybe throw into the chat what you think the right answer should be. Right, maybe give this another 10 or 20 seconds and then move on with lots of time for our last panel. Okay, interesting to see the competitive pressures still seem to be the main issue that people are identifying is presenting this sort of thing. And maybe it relates to, I know there was one question that came up in the Q&A and it was addressed, so we didn't bring it up, but around IP issues and sharing of information and how that can enable or constrain innovation and broader collaboration. All right, Isabel, maybe 10 more seconds and we can move along.
All right, giving it 5 more seconds and 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and closing the poll. Thanks, everyone.
All right, thank you. And I just want to thank again our 4 panelists. Really interesting discussion, and I appreciate your contributions and the different perspectives you brought. So with that, Alan, I'll hand it back over to you.
Thank you, Jeff. And for our last panel, we're going to be looking at sort of drilling down a little bit on the particular challenges that may be unique across the wide range of commodities that are faced with the opportunity of a greater circular supply chains. We're all aware that the role of steel as a material and its unique challenges and the increasing demands for copper related to batteries and the way in which copper is being mined and refined are all issues that have some similarities, but also are unique in terms of their particular supply chains and drivers. Then there's critical minerals, which are technologically and from a market point of view entirely different. So we are very interested in how to address those in a more particular way. And then also we have the regional implications on not only by commodity, but by region. We've heard from Latin America, we've heard from Africa, from the Nordics. And how does this really look? And we've got some new research that the World Bank has undertaken, which should shed some light on this and give us some more inputs. So we're very fortunate. We've got four highly qualified individuals who can speak to these different areas. We've got Malcolm Shang, who is Global Mining Closure and Reclamation Specialist and Circular Economy Champion within ArcelorMittal. Jose Araneda, who's Sustainability Development Manager for Codelco in Chile. Andrew Gattes works with Natural Resources Canada, the Canadian federal government, and is the director of the Critical Minerals Task Force, and will bring sort of a government's perspective to some of those challenges. And finally, we have Danielle Laporta, who representing the World Bank's Climate Smart Mining Initiative, who will speak to some of those, some of the bank's approaches and their recent work in this area. So we only have 30 minutes for discussion. We've managed to keep on track so far, and we want to respect people's time. So we'll remind everyone to keep their answers as brief as possible for now, with the belief that this is just one of many conversations we'll be having on these topics over the years. So I'm going to start off with Malcolm and ask the question as one of the world's largest steel producers. What does ArcelorMittal think of in terms of value creation from circular economy, from the perspective of a mining company particularly?
Thanks, Alan. Appreciate being here. So in terms of, I guess, value creation, or really the value proposition for, I guess, not just our company, but mining companies in general, it's a competitive advantage. It's been spoken about and touched on by earlier speakers that essentially sustainability is very top of mind from numerous aspects. And it's really going to become very simply a way of doing business going forward. But very simply, I mean, there's also some very tangible bottom line benefits. It was mentioned previously, I think it was the speaker from Ford, was talking about essentially the increased demand for responsibly resourced resources. And essentially that allows the creation for a premium product given this stage of not just circularity adoption, but also sustainability in terms of the level of sustainability within the industry. So in terms of that, it becomes a premium product, which obviously allows for higher margins. In addition, circular economy initiatives essentially allow efficiencies within a process, and that can lead to cost reductions and therefore increased margins. And then in addition to that, there's also potential to reduce both environmental liabilities as well as improve license to operate in different jurisdictions, given the positive impacts that something like this can actually have for a company's reputation.
Great, thank you. And in terms of, we've had a lot of discussion on the idea of partnerships and linkages throughout supply chains. And I know that you're doing this at a very granular level right now, where you're trying to motivate certain partners along the way to become part of this vision. They may not be central to their business model, but it's what you're trying to instill in others for hopefully mutual benefit. Can you talk a little bit about some opportunities or priorities you have within your supply chain to motivate new partnerships?
Sure. I won't go into too many specifics, but in terms of supply chains, I mean, it was spoken about earlier by a few of the speakers, actually, in terms of how important a green supply chain is. And the circular economy allows us that essential platform to drive suppliers, both upstream and downstream in the supply chain, to actually become part of that. In terms of opportunities, we see opportunities for other companies along that supply chain to be part of the green economy. And the opportunities really lie, in my mind, the biggest one is actually the immaturity of the circular economy industry / network within the mining industry. That to me is a big gap that is essentially very ripe for the taking. There was a book I read many years ago in terms of called Blue Ocean Strategy. It's a business book, and the concept is very simple. It's really about, as a business, you want to be focusing on untapped markets, because that is the easiest way to get market share and then become a prominent member within that industry. I'll go further to say that untapped resources, which essentially is a lot of waste. In my mind, there's no real such thing as waste. It's really a resource in the wrong time, wrong place, and wrong state. If companies can actually think of ways of tapping into those waste streams that haven't been taken advantage of within the mining industry, I think there's a lot of opportunities that lie within that space, not just for particular companies in specific companies, but also in regions. As an example, I think in South America, there was a partnership by Michelin and a couple of the mining companies in the area to essentially recycle tires. So even though the economies of scale were not there for one mining company, they were there for a region. And it's that type of thinking and sort of a collaboration with partners outside of the mining industry where I think the most opportunity actually lies.
Great, thank you very much. I want to now move to another large global player and quite a different context. And so, Jose, I wanted to come back to you with the same questions, both in terms of being a major global copper producer, but also being part of the rather interesting set of commitments and nascent development of circular economy in Chile, which is quite an interesting regional development. So perhaps your reflections on that, starting with what you see as the value creation that CE brings to you as a mining company.
Thanks, Alan. First of all, thank you for letting me be part of this panel. It's a great pleasure to be here. From our perspective, we see several opportunities for value creation from circular economy at Codelco. And that's why we have included circular economy as part of our strategy and our sustainable development goals. So we have a very clear and very clear commitment to recycle 65% of our industrial waste by 2030. At the moment, we're working towards achieving this goal, and we believe that the circular economy is the path that we should follow to accomplish these targets. And understanding that circular economy is more than just recycling and reusing waste materials, we see value mainly in 4 different aspects. One of them is extending the life of our assets through repairs, retrofitting, and upgrading our machinery, for example. And I would like to provide an example of something that we're doing now thanks to this circular economy approach. One of our largest mine, Chuquicamata, our open pit mine, is now transitioning to an underground mine. So there are several tracks that were very close to the end of their lives. And by the approach that we used to take at Codelco before, we will basically discard these tracks. But now what we're doing now is basically having an overhaul process. And we're gonna use these tracks. There are around 30 tracks that we will transfer them to relocate them from Chuquicamata mine to Rajoinca, one of our new projects that we are currently developing. So, and second, we also value creation in terms of the business model. The circular economy allow us to rethink the way we procure goods and services. And an example for that, I think it's something that's happening right now, and it has to be with this new trend of electrifying our mines. At El Teniente, we are incorporating electrical machinery into our fleet. And the way that we are incorporating this fleet is through a battery as a service model. So basically, The company that provides the equipment will provide the equipment, the battery, and we will own the equipment, but we're not gonna own the battery. So that means that the battery will be in charge of this specific company that will replace the battery as needed, and they also be in charge of recycling it. So these new trends allow us to rethink the way we're doing mining and the way we're gonna do it in the future as well. So it's good to incorporate the circular economy approach at the right moment, because some of these are very long contracts, so it's good to have that view as well. That was the second value creation opportunity that we saw. And third has to do with repurposing waste as a valuable resource. And this is basically by reintroducing waste into industrial processes. And that also will help us to reduce the waste management cost. And here I'm talking about reusing some of the residues that we produce, for example, the copper slag, the tailing dams, the rubber from our tires. And we see here a huge potential in terms of using the waste that we generate and incorporating it into the construction industry. That's something that's going to happen in Chile quite soon, even though technically many of our waste that we produce have been technically approved and validated that can be used in the construction industry. There's still some regulatory enables that need to happen, and it's currently happening right now in Chile. I will mention what Peter mentioned, that we have a circular economy roadmap. The legislation is changing as well. So the idea is that over the next year, the regulation will allow us to recycle even more of the waste that we generate. And finally, we also see a huge opportunity in terms of engaging with our communities through circular economy. We believe that, as Malcolm mentioned, some of the waste that we generate, that maybe we should call it resources or maybe byproducts, can be used as an input from local companies, local entrepreneurs, for them to start a business. And we've been approached already for some small players, and they can incorporate a circular business, for example, using the organic waste or plastic, and some other waste that we generate. And even though this can probably have a very small impact for us as a mining company, for these local entrepreneurs, if it's done correctly, it can have a huge impact. So those are the main value creation opportunities that we see with circular economy at Codelco, Alan.
Thank you, Jose. And I think your last point, it is really critical, is around the differential sort of benefits and scales of impacts that have to be considered. You know, what is a minor piece within the Codelco balance sheet can be a very major piece elsewhere, and doing those sorts of metrics, those sorts of measurements within these industrial ecosystems is part of what could unlock currently untapped potential. So I think that's you've hit on a number of really great concrete examples of how you're reaching out through supply chains to fully manifest the circularity beyond recycling and beyond reusing. So thank you. I'm going to come back to the question there around enabling future supply chain cooperation, and I want to move to Andrew Gattas. And Andrew, you've been involved with quite a wide range of discussions within Canada and, importantly, with a number of international partners around the ways in which governments can coordinate to improve supply chain security for critical minerals, particular as their role with renewable energy infrastructure, while at the same time paying attention to the fulfillment of sustainable development goals. So you bring some interesting insights and experience to this. What are you seeing from a government perspective, some of the areas of strategic priority and some of the challenges that governments may be able to address in pursuit of a more sustainable approach to critical minerals supply?
Thanks, Alan, and again, thanks for having me here today. So I really echo a lot of the comments that have been made. I think throughout the presentations today, just in terms of some of the opportunities, and I guess from a government of Canada perspective, how we're seeing those unfold as well. I mean, just looking at something like mining value from waste really presents a large opportunity. And I guess at more of a macro level, in terms of reducing environmental liability and also providing an opportunity for economic growth. And that obviously translates down into communities as well. I like the way that you framed in terms of the the different levels of impacts that can be derived from initiating initiatives with respect to the circular economy. And I think the mining value from waste examples provided thus far really exemplify that. And I think that point also, I struggled with the question in the survey earlier on in terms of environment, economy, or social, and had to pick one because really I think the opportunities are quite meshed across all three and the benefits as well. If you just look at some of the stats, I think 90% of tailings produced in Canada each year come from metal mines. And so, and some of these are, either maybe sites that have been in place for decades or they're abandoned sites. And so there's this opportunity to recover material from there. Oftentimes a mine may have only focused on one particular metal, but co-deposits, there may be still lots of value still there. And I liked the comment in terms of not necessarily viewing this as a bit of waste, but I think as markets shift, it's creating a new opportunity, particularly in the critical mineral space. There's also the recycling aspect. So I think 150,000 tons of electronic scrap are collected annually, and up to half of that is in ferrous and non-ferrous metals. So we need better data and information around what that looks like to be able to kind of better tap some of that market, because ultimately if we can use all of these existing sources and build out the circularity regime, then it'll place less demand on creating new mine sites. And even if we best efforts, there is sometimes an environmental impact. So all this needs to go hand in hand, just given some of the demand projections we're seeing in terms of demand for critical minerals, for batteries, rare earths, you kind of name it. So that's just kind of a view about the opportunity side, but in terms of some of the things that we're doing, I guess our engagements are multifold. On the domestic side, we have something called the Canadian Minerals and Metals Plan. That's a federal, provincial, territorial initiative launched in 2019. Embedded within that is the circular economy, including metals recycling as a priority area. And so, there's a series of initiatives being undertaken in that environment. That also includes engagement with Indigenous communities as well, on a whole host of things to ensure that all the ESG considerations associated with mining within Canada are front and center. The conversations are happening, and there's kind of co-development in terms of initiatives and programs that could support further work in this area. On the international side, which my team is quite engaged in, we have the Canada-US Joint Action Plan on Critical Minerals Collaboration. So we've had this in place for a couple of years now. Lots of good discussions in terms of areas for collaboration, whether it's on the geoscience side, but also in R&D. And regardless of the international partnerships, we have a great framework in place with the European Union. We also have engagements with Japan as well, and starting to have discussions with the UK. One similar theme in all of these has been the circular economy and mining value from waste in particular, in improving recycling and aligning approaches. And I think that's really emblematic of both a view that we can do more together in this space, the importance of engagement, sharing best practices, particularly in R&D, and really advancing this overall. So we're trying to take a multi-pronged approach to this and bring in different players from across the supply chain so that we're taking a holistic view of what's needed. As always, incremental progress. I think we're starting to make it here and there. Thanks.
Thank you. Yeah, certainly as we are trying to get a handle on waste streams, the role of trade and the role of policy has I guess we can all agree had a somewhat perverse effect in some respects, or unintended effect on the movement of waste, and we've been brought up short on that. So it's good to hear that that you are speaking with a number of the other policy shops and regulators to think through the new regime of, or the new tools that would be required to rationalize this into a better blend of secondary and primary materials. Great. Thanks very much, Andrew. And our last speaker of the day is Daniela. I mean, the World Bank has been very involved in advancing our collective understanding of the kinds of minerals that are going to be needed in this transition to a clean energy future. So we're all quite indebted to you and your team to shining a light on that, and also really interested to see how that's evolved toward a very explicit circular economy model in terms of the implementation of some of the recommendations and the integrated model. So, but I know that you've been doing some work to see on the ground what the transition really could mean and how it could differentially affect different regions, different players. And so one of the things I was hoping you could talk to us about is that work, as well as other aspects of the Climate Smart Mining project that you might want to highlight, because I know it's always growing and transitioning with new input. So I'll turn it over to you. And I believe we have slides, Isabel, if you could put those up. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alan, for the invitation to speak here today. It's really exciting because the topic of circularity is at the same time very interesting, but also very challenging. And I'll share with you what we have been doing at the World Bank. Next slide, please. So our research is really not new. I mean, I'm sure all of you have seen it, and other institutions have been publishing similar research looking at the materiality of the energy transition and how much minerals and metals we will need. But I think that in the discussions around circularity, it's very important that we look at the numbers, because it highlights the urgency to tackle circularity and find solutions for less extraction and better extraction, and the reuse, repurpose, recycling of materials. So our research has shown really that the more ambitious we are in our climate targets, the more minerals and metals we will need. And of course, many speakers today here have mentioned, for example, the growth in demand that's going to come from batteries, but it's not just the battery story. It's all about other base metals like copper, like nickel. So we will see a very significant demand for these minerals and metals if we are to reach our climate goals. But from the World Bank, we also understand that development means more minerals and metals also needed. If we think about countries that are developing and all the infrastructure they will need, and consumption patterns that change, all that puts a pressure on the minerals and metals sector, which needs to be able to respond to that. So next slide, please. So often when we presented these numbers, people would ask us, but can't we just recycle, everything? And then we do not need to deal with the extraction part. So we decided to do a deeper dive into what role recycling would really play in meeting some of these climate targets. And I think Geoff mentioned in the beginning, it's really, even if we do scale recycling to 100% at the end of life for some of these critical minerals and metals, and here I'm including critical minerals, I'm using the term loosely to include copper and aluminum, what we're calling in the World Bank climate action minerals. So even if we do scale up recycling, it's still not going to be enough to meet demand. We still need primary production to happen. And not only that, recycling, we need to think and improve the process of recycling, because sometimes just because something is recycled doesn't necessarily mean that it is sustainable and green. So with all that in mind, if we could go to the next slide, please. The World Bank created the Climate Smart Mining Initiative, and what the Climate Smart Mining Initiative does is basically look at these mineral and metal supply chains and use this framework that I'm presenting here to address the carbon footprint, but also other ESG considerations. And we have here 4 main pillars of climate mitigation, climate resilience, circular economy, and creating market opportunities. For us at the bank, it's very much about how can we help developing countries, one, benefit, be able to develop these resources, but also very much aware that these resources need to be developed in a sustainable and climate smart way. I don't have time to go into all the details of the climate smart mining framework, but perhaps I'd like to just focus on the circular economy pillar, because for us, circularity is the key to really improving these supply chains and making them more sustainable and diminishing the pressure that this additional mining will put in on ecosystems, on communities, on our planet in general. So if we can go into the next slide, please. So in terms of circularity, we've divided it into 3 building blocks. And I know these don't cover everything, but from the World Bank perspective, it's really what we want to focus on to help our client countries start thinking about circularity, start implementing what the underpinning environment that needs to be there in order for the circularity to really happen. And it was really interesting. I was happy to see that when we were discussing what were the drivers, that could potentially help speed up circularity, help make it happen. Regulation was among one of them, because one of the things that I think is really important in all this discussion is that sometimes, we put a lot of pressure on the industry, we put a lot of pressure on the downstream users of these minerals and metals, but sometimes governments are kind of hanging in here. We don't really know what it is that they need to do. And so we can't stress enough how policy matters and how, having the underpinning legal regulatory frameworks for all of this to happen is so important. So the building blocks here is, of course, on recycling. And I mentioned, the work that we are doing on recycling, but it's really putting in place policies and mechanisms for to incentivize recycling. It's also about looking at opportunities for developing countries to really take on more recycling. I mean, we see a huge opportunity here. Some panelists have already mentioned, in terms of job generation, in terms of revenues. So for us, this is really critical. Repurposing, of course, we will need to repurpose and we will need to reuse these materials when possible. And here again, we see huge opportunities for some of these developing countries to do so. I think the most critical one, and the one that sometimes it's very hard to really pin on exactly how this is going to happen, is around the circular business models and designs. Sometimes downstream, it's much easier, but for the mining sector, how do we take into consideration these circular business models and designs and mainstream them into mining operations? So that for us is a big challenge, and one that we are hoping to put, some thought into and finance further research, so that we can better understand what some of the opportunities are. Maybe take us to the next slide, please. So just to illustrate one project that we have currently ongoing, we are working together with Bushveld Energy, or Bushveld Minerals, which produces vanadium, has a vanadium mine in South Africa. So Bushveld has a proposition of leasing vanadium instead of selling it to ensure the circularity of vanadium, which is for us a really interesting project, because one, we want to understand, first of all, if this business model is feasible from all angles, not just from a business perspective, but also from an environmental perspective, from a policy perspective, from a country perspective. Does this make sense, right? And also we want to see if this leasing model can be applied to other commodities. We know there are some leasing models that already exist for precious metals, like for gold and for platinum, but these are like for a very short time, and they do not have the complexity and the risks associated with the leasing model that is more longer term, because in the long term, we don't know how markets are going to behave. We don't know technological changes, how these technological changes are going to impact these circularity models. So all of these things we want to answer with this study. And it's really interesting because I was listening to the discussions around the drivers for incentivizing circularity. And in this case here, in this specific case of vanadium, I can say that the driver here was very much about the feasibility of the mine and of the technology. I'll explain a little bit better. So, for example, vanadium flow batteries, they're more expensive to produce. So instead of, the leasing model comes as an alternative to lower the cost of these vanadium flow batteries so that they can then be competitive as compared to other technologies. So the driver here was very much the company finding a way to reduce their costs and make their product competitive. But then it is also about finding a good circular model for this metal. In the case of vanadium, and in the case of the use of vanadium in these vanadium flow batteries, it's pretty simple because the way the battery is structured, you can remove the vanadium very easily. It's not the case for other commodities. But we're hoping to look into this and look if for other battery minerals, this can also be applied. And in doing so, we hope to contribute a little to some ideas around circularity of these critical minerals. I think that was my last slide.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Danielle. This is the range of work that's going on there and the attention to the detail, both from a point of view of markets and technologies. And if I understand correctly, you do have a series of reports coming out that will be focused on different regions and different opportunities possessed by that. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. We're also working on some reports looking at recycling of batteries, but looking at very much from the regional and country perspective, not so much focused on the technology, but trying to identify opportunities for countries for recycling, not just batteries, but for all of these critical minerals as well.
Great. Okay. Well, if you get a chance, put those links in the chat and/or that leads me nicely into our next phase. In the interest of time, as much as I would like to pursue a number of these questions, I'm going to move us through to the wrap-up phase. And again, thanks everyone for your insights from your different perspectives and the inspiring practical solutions that you're starting to work towards and demonstrate. So we are now basically on time and hoping to get you out at the top of the hour. But now we're trying to bring together some of these threads, which is a near impossible task, but we'll try a little bit. But we want your help in doing that. So we want to provide you with a chance to provide some insights, some guidance, as I said earlier, around the lessons learned from today, around the path forward. And so in doing so, we've set up a virtual whiteboard, which some of you are probably familiar with. And in that, we have a number of categories. There's priorities for action, areas for follow-up and next steps, follow-up questions for speakers, which we can ensure that they get hold of, and additional resources. But don't feel constrained if you by these categories. If you feel you have other thoughts you'd like to share, then you can do so. Isabel, do you want to just bring that whiteboard up, and then we can start that? And while we're doing that, I'm going to turn to my co-moderators here for some thoughts on today's key findings.
Thank you very much, Alan. And yes, you should be able to see the Miro board coming on the screen right now. So you'll see that we have some boxes set up with some stickies, and we're just playing with some things here. Some things are moving around, but we'll fix that in a second. So we would encourage you to grab a sticky. There are some that are already pre-allocated here. But we'll essentially move the stickies into the box, and you're welcome to add any input right in there. So you'll see some stickies on the side and some with some instructions, and apologies if we still have some right now. We're just trying to fix some of the formatting issues with their board, but we'll get that fixed up really quickly. So, but feel free to right away grab one of those yellow stickies and start typing in your feedback, and we'll make sure to capture that in our follow-ups. So thank you, everyone. And if you're having any issues accessing the Miro boards, let us know in the chat box. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Again, it was such a rich and diverse set of perspectives regionally and from business and government and policy. It was hard to capture. I take it as very heartening to see the amount of work that is going on in individual companies in regions like Chile, like Africa, the Nordics. There's clearly the idea of circularity as it applies to minerals has taken root in a number of areas, and we're seeing some very tangible examples of progress from the sort of the granular site level through to roadmaps. So on the one hand, good news, we've got a lot of people around the world who see the value in this and are manifesting in different ways. But the other thing I heard was that there is, if we want to keep pace and if we want to really generate the full potential benefit, there are both regional and industrial silos which we need to still do some more work on breaking down. Lots of lessons to learn from each other, from other sectors, and lots of benefits, both from a market point of view and from a learning point of view, that can be manifested. And that seems like that collaboration space is still very much open, and very much an area that could add value for each of us. So I know that we're certainly interested from a Canadian perspective on doing some of this outreach and working together with different partners, and looking forward to following up. But I'd like to turn to Ashley and Jeff. Just top of mind, anything that sort of bowled you over or surprised you or inspired you from the conversations today?
Yeah, I think just jumping in is a couple of, I'll just list them out, things I jotted down that I thought were really beautiful remarks. Beautiful in the sense that they were impactful, and I think they resonated with our audience listening. It's the right thing to do. We heard from Paramita from Rio Tinto when, asked, what's the imperative towards circular economy? What's that driver? So just that, clear statement with conviction, it's the right thing to do. Codelco, I actually really love the practical examples Jose was sharing with us, servitizing the batteries that are going into their electric fleets on the mine site. I think it helps to draw down to that mine site level and then scale up, as you just said, Alan, to regional roadmaps. I also think there was a really good commentary in the Q&A and also in our chat function around the need to look not only at the commodity, but all resources and utilities that flowing into the development of metals and minerals. And how do we look at closing the loop on a lot of those so we reduce this impact substantially? I think I liked what Peter Ostervik had to say in terms of circularity contracts for suppliers. This is real, this is happening, and it's happening in Chile. And I think there's a lot we can take and learn from that. And innovation happening at the speed of trust. Trust came through loud and clear throughout today's session. I thought Carl's statement on that was really impactful and resonated a lot with me. So they were my key takeaways for today.
Thanks, Ashley. Especially given that it's 5 o'clock in the morning for you. That was extraordinarily intelligent and insightful. Jeff, do you want to give us your thoughts on what you heard?
Yeah, thanks. It's hard to follow Ashley. She gives such a succinct and direct summary of everything that was going on. But maybe re-emphasize, pick up on you. So one is I really enjoyed through the whole conversation, Alan, when we started I started working with you on this and then connected through Ashley about a year ago. A lot of the discussions initially tended towards, well what's circularity in metals and minerals? Well, it means circularity at the mine site. And in this conversation really expanded much beyond that, right? We're looking, we need to reduce waste at the mine site and increase circularity there. We need to look at innovation all along the supply chain. We need to integrate in small scale enterprises all the way to OEMs. We need to think about communities. We need to think about artisanal and small scale miners and how they integrate into the system. And we need to think about traceability all the way along so that consumers can make more informed decisions. And all of that leads back to Ashley's comment that we need to think again about the materials and supplies that go into mining operations, as well as how products then are being designed, what materials they're using, and how that is affecting where innovation is going forward. And I thought that came out across a range of the different discussions today, which was really fantastic to see. And the last thing is I was struck by how much trust came up in the conversation as well, how it links to issues of traceability and being able to demonstrate progress, how it links to ideas of the sort of platform innovations that came up in the first panel, in sort of enabling broader innovation at a competitive level, but building on initial trust and sharing of data and technology and ideas. And what that means for social license in the end, and the ability to continue operating and meeting the increasing demand for metals and minerals that we're going to have to if we're going to be serious about meeting the low carbon challenge. And so there's some key points there that came up from my view.
Great.
Also, it looks like the illustration is in the chat now from Kat, which is great. I haven't been able to pull it up yet, but it seems to be there for download in case people want to see it.
All right. Do you want to have let's as a bonus for those who have stuck with us throughout this, maybe Isabel, would you be able to just flash it up on the screen for a few minutes, and we can enjoy the, well, wow, that's colorful and well populated. Great.
Yeah, I think a really rich representation of a lot of the messages we heard during our session, but linked throughout a number of them, and different ideas that have come in since we last, it's the question about how we can fund ideation. I saw there was a rich discussion in the chat sort of after our session about how financing can be extended to different players to engage in the sort of open innovation we were discussing, and whether that's SMEs or different players in addition to large scale investors. Being part of a network design process, trust again is right there. A really interesting and rich representation. So, and a neat platform to hopefully build future conversations from.
Yes, absolutely. I certainly, as you said, when we started this, there was a lot of discussion on the inventorying of waste and the swapping of resources, and all of that being a really important way of capturing value and driving innovation, looking at gaps in supply chains. And one of the things that I came away from today was thinking about our need to inventory values and how that can be realized in different ways at different scales, and how each of those together is going to unlock quite a bit of potential, and then and quite a bit of innovation. So we inventory our waste, but let's also inventory the potential values and really capture those out and see where we can optimize those potential benefits. So I think that was certainly one of the intriguing insights that really came home for me today. Well, in terms of next steps, as we move to wrap up, we will post a link to where this recording will be available for future viewing. And if any of you are calling in from Australia, I'm sure you'll want to see this again at a time when you're actually awake. And then we'll also be circulating a written summary report in October. Don't hesitate to get in touch with any of us in the meantime if you've got particular ideas, inspirations, or would like to be part of a conversation going forward. Some of you will definitely be reaching out to, but we'd love to have a two-way conversation as we start to chart what a future kind of collaborative space will look like. So don't be shy on that, and thank you for all the time that you've taken to share this conversation with us. So in closing, on behalf of the team, I'd really once again like to extend our sincere thanks to the speakers and the panelists. You've been very generous with your time, and today with your knowledge. It's been a very rich array, and our hope in initially setting this up as an international conversation, one that did reflect full supply chains, has been realized to a greater degree than I could have hoped. So that's great. I want to say a special thanks due to our support team, Isabel and Marion. They've been tireless, exacting, remarkably cheerful and energetic throughout this whole planning and execution process, and it would have been simply quite impossible to do it without their expertise. And as well, the team at Corio, especially Janie and Kat, along with Ashley, have been a great source of guidance and talent and enthusiasm throughout. So it's been a good shared effort. And
I'd like to just quickly jump in, also acknowledge Sonia Patel and Shahid Hosseini, two of our RAs here at Smart Prosperity, have been diligently taking notes in the background and are going to help with Circulate, but they're doing a lot of really great work on circularity and rising stars in the field, and thank you for their efforts too. Great. Well, and we'll be particularly thankful as we go to try and put this summary report together, which will be a no small challenge. So that's great to know that's underway. So, and thanks to all of you who've attended and actively engaged today. I think it was a thought-provoking discussion, lots of good feedback through the various mechanisms. Take your last chance to throw on to the whiteboard if you can. And again, if you feel so inclined, then just feel free to follow up with us, but we'll look forward to next steps. And one last point is Isabel put in the chat that we do have a follow-up survey. We do take your comments seriously, and as you'll see through the other things she put in the chat, we have a lot coming up, and any comments you have will be used to help inform our sessions going forward. So please take a chance to look at the follow-up survey and send us any thoughts or comments. Great. The two other metals related side sessions that will be coming up is one on the October 6th, which will focus on EV battery technologies and economies for North America. And on October 13th, we'll be looking at critical minerals and the end of life electronics. Those will be produced in conjunction with Natural Resources Canada and should generate a more focused look on a particular sets of problems and challenges that we have going forward. So once again, thanks very much to everyone involved, and we'll look forward to next steps.